I'm Rafael Kadaris with the Revolution Nothing Less show, and my guest today is a liberal New York Times reader. Welcome.
Hey, did you read this editorial in the New York Times?
No, what does it say?
It's about why the U.S. should keep sending more and more weapons to Ukraine fighting Russia, even though it risks nuclear war.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
But it says right here that there's a moral and ethical obligation of the world's democracies to help a nation whose freedom is threatened by an authoritarian power.
Oh, really? So are they advocating for the world's democracies to arm Palestinians against the fascist Israeli apartheid state, which has been brutally occupying Palestinian lands for decades?
No, definitely not.
Okay, so when they talk about authoritarian powers, they're just talking about America's enemies. Got it.
Just whatever, don't worry about that. It says right here that national self-determination has long been a guiding principle of American foreign policy. Guiding principle of American foreign policy.
You gotta be kidding me. Was national self-determination the guiding principle when the U.S. waged a war against Mexico and stole half the land?
But
how about when the U.S. colonized Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines and Guam?
But
what about when the CIA helped to overthrow popular leaders and governments in Iran, Guatemala, Congo, Indonesia, Chile, Honduras, and more?
It doesn't seem like it, but...
Or when the U.S. slaughtered millions in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
Okay, I see what you mean. While they admit that this guiding principle hasn't been followed perfectly, they do write that Russians may argue that the United States is hardly the innocent in its global dealings, whether invading Iraq on false pretenses or covertly working to overthrow governments in, among others, Chile and Nicaragua. Certainly there is much to criticize and debate in American foreign policy during and since the Cold War.
Those things are not a matter of debate. They're a matter of fact.
Okay, but the editorial still insists that America has this guiding principle of defending democracy and self-determination, and that's why we have to help Ukraine. That's why we have to help Ukraine. That's why we have to help Ukraine.
Look, in order to help you understand the poisonous American chauvinist logic you're being indoctrinated with, let's go to some leaked footage we obtained from the New York Times editorial board.
Hey, Sarah, look, write this down. I'm looking over this draft that you sent me. Make sure that you say America's founding principles are democracy and self-determination.
But what about slavery and genocide of the Native people? The discrimination, police murder, mass incarceration that still goes on?
Just say we're moving towards a more perfect union. Just say we're moving towards a more perfect union. Perfect union. Perfect union. Look, we're moving there. I mean, yeah, we may carry out conquests, invasions, coups, and we may violently interfere in all sorts of countries around the world.
Yeah, we intervene in Latin America like over 100 times.
Yeah, you see, look, we do this for a greater purpose, or at least, in opposition to a greater evil. Look, we do this for a greater purpose. Or at least, in opposition to a greater evil, greater evil, greater evil.
But isn't the U.S. the only country that has ever used nuclear weapons and actually incinerated like hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians?
Okay, Samantha. Yeah, look, we did that to save lives, especially the lives of American soldiers. Look, we did that to save lives, especially the lives of American soldiers. American soldiers. American soldiers.
Got it.
I mean, I know there's this whole thing about, like, we broke our promise to the Russians in the 90s not to expand NATO or militarily surround Russia. But, I mean...
Isn't that one of the main reasons for this war?
But, look, let's emphasize the fact that the people in those countries, they asked for NATO. All right, Sarah?
Sounds fair and balanced to me. Sounds fair and balanced to me. Sounds fair and balanced to me.
You see what the New York Times is doing here? All of America's crimes get explained away, dismissed as insignificant or irrelevant, because America is a force for good in the world. But this is complete bullshit.
It's starting to sound like the guiding principle is imperialist domination and plunder.
Exactly. And that's the same principle that's driving the proxy war the U.S. is waging in Ukraine. Not helping the people there, but using them as cannon fodder against their Russian imperialist rivals. And liberal media like the New York Times is bamboozling you into going along with it. As Bob Avakian put it, the so-called free press in this country is nothing more than the propaganda instrument of the capitalist imperialist ruling class.
It doesn't sound much different than the Kremlin propaganda that they are constantly denouncing.
Go to revcom.us to get the truth about the war in Ukraine and the real interests of humanity.